And everybody, welcome back to the BigCheese AI Podcast. I'm the world's second best moderator, joined by Sean Hise, Jacob Wise, and Brandon Corbin. We are the BigCheese AI team, the usual suspects here on the podcast. Today we are talking about Apple. Apple wins again, everybody. Ring the bell. Raise the flag.
Maybe. That's the question.
So what's the Apple and AI?
Yeah.
Has it happened? Is Siri not going to be dumb anymore? Are we going to finally miss out, unfortunately, on the amazing Brandon rants on how bad Siri is because AI is now a part of Apple? Brandon, what's going on?
Yeah, so we don't have anything right now, right? So, okay, let's actually backtrack a little bit because there are things that Apple's been doing in the AI space before even really the whole AI thing was a thing, right? So your photos. They've done a lot of AI imagery work there. And for the longest time, I mean, it's been 4 years, probably 5 years, that you've been able to do the face detection, right, within all of your photos within the app.
Yeah, if you wanted to, for example, and I always encourage people, they're like, oh, I can't find that picture. I'm like, just search for it.
Yeah.
They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, oh, he's like, oh, I caught this fish last week. Well, then search fish.
Exactly.
And it'll pull up every single picture that you've ever taken that has a fish in it.
So they've definitely been doing a lot of work kind of behind the scenes and subtly, but not being like, hey, we're AI. And that seems to be kind of Apple's MO.
Not just the thing, though. It's like half the crap that people are selling as AI, Apple just calls like a feature in their product.
Well, isn't that exactly what they did with like the Vision Pro? They called it something else than what it was. It's not virtual reality, augmented reality. It's some other.
Was it like
Spatial
spatial
display.
UI or something like that?
Spatial computing.
Right.
It's
Well,
like,
they take the time to think about things at a whole nother level before they even consider going to market, and they also watch the market exist for a while before they'll put a product out there.
Right.
But I mean, if you have $1 trillion and you can attract the best engineers in the world, and you have a proven process built by, Johnny Ives and Steve Jobs, whatever, you're gonna. It's just a different. Everything they do is just built differently.
The salaries that these folks are making, it's kind of interesting. So Elon's been bitching that OpenAI has been recruiting AI employees, or no, Tesla AI employees, been pulling them over because they're offering like $900G a year. Right?
God.
Like, could you imagine making $900G
Just
a
on a
year?
salary.
Just on a salary. Yeah. Again, like, so, I mean, your taxes are covered, your insurance is paid, and you're getting
I wonder how HR feels when they get like the 2 week going to New Zealand notification from the 900G guy. He's like, and he like clocks out at like 3:30 on every
unlimited
Thursday and
PTO.
Friday. He's like, I'm heading to the golf course. It's like, dude, no, you're not. You're working 900 hours a week.
You couldn't imagine. I mean, imagine opening up your paycheck and what 900,000 a year would be. What, like an 7? Would that be 70 grand a fucking paycheck bi-weekly?
Well, also, who would sign up an employment agreement? I mean, I guess that's how professional athletes are, but like that's not the right business structure to make that much money in, right? Like you're paying income taxes just straight
I
on
just
the
did the tax on it.
Okay.
You're making $900,000 a year. It's assuming 25% of that's taken out for taxes some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Your monthly income is $52,000.
Oh yeah, their taxes are more than that. The taxes would be like 39%.
Yeah, probably. Right.
But still,
Not quite in that tax bracket yet. Sorry, I'm making $900,000 a year.
So it's interesting that but no question, Apple has all the money. They could pay all these people or whatnot. They've been in the space. So we saw last week, we talked a little bit about some of the things that Siri can do, like again with the sleep analysis and all that. So they have these like very small, subtle integrations of AI into the platform. But I think that, like what we were just talking about with R.E.A.L.M, which is R.E.A.L.M. Is it R.E.A.L.M? Or are we just going to call it R.E.A.L.M?
well, but what you just said, everyone needs to understand why this is why Apple wins, is they have the touch points. They have the device. Yeah. They have your photos. They have your health data. They have this. They're building these features on that they're not even calling AI, that are just
It's going to be AI, but you won't know it. It's just going to seem really smart.
And that's why when we talk about R.E.A.L.M, why
Right.
it's so smart.
Yeah. So, but Siri right now is an idiot. Like,
Really?
Oh, really? You know this, right? We all know this. Like, if you try to ask it anything, beyond just like what's the weather today or what's on my calendar. So I was like, well, I can send it to your iPhone if you open it up or whatever the hell it is, right? That's the one that I'm the most excited for, is that we actually get a real LLM powering Siri, that we can have these real kind of conversations, just very much like what you have with ChatGPT's kind of interface.
I think Google's doing this as well, and I think, well, my point was, yes, Apple's winning a lot. Their apps are better. I mean, the marketplace is better, and it's going to be easier for one of the examples. I was watching a video on. Nobody knows what it's going to be yet, but one of the examples was I have 10 apps open. I've got Spotify and Amazon and text message. My friend says, "Hey, can you buy X, Y, and Z on Amazon?" Or get one of these. You're talking about getting a mic. Now, I would never just be like, "Hey Siri, order what Sean just asked me to order." If it's a $400 whatever dollar mic. But if it was something innocuous, like I could see myself doing something like that, where it gets the ball rolling, gets to Amazon, and then removes the need for me to copy and paste. Yeah. And Google's opportunity is more for like home automation. I have a ton of automated lights and things like that, and it's all using like that Matter protocol now. But so eventually Apple can kind of connect to those things as well. But I want to be able to say, "Hey Google, turn on Netflix and replay the next episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine."
Right.
Because right now I have 4 different ways to turn on Netflix on my TV for some dumb reason. I have a Roku, a Chromecast, off my Samsung TV, and then I could cast it via my actual device.
No Apple TV.
No Apple TV. No. I had it, and then I was like, I'm paying like $10,000 a month in service now.
I guess here's one of my questions to you guys from a development side of things. So one thing that makes Apple so amazing is that everyone uses their devices, right? So like Sean said, their distribution's incredible. And when we start to look at, individuals using it, makes all sense in the world. That's kind of all the examples. But you go to businesses. And I mean, we've built products with Apple. Mm-hmm. We've tried to get the app approved, and they can slap like regulations on you, and they grab percentages of your revenue if you're creating an app for the App Store. I mean, if this concept of like, oh, they're going to take over ChatGPT, well, I think there's probably an advantage to still using a ChatGPT for what they can offer in terms of like the open source and more customization of their API. Because I imagine if you're using like Apple's API, you're not going to be able to like create these like platforms that's going to be so encrypted.
I don't think that's the market they're going to get into though. Yeah. Is like they don't give a crap about serving up the general AI API market and trying to like build apps on top of their thing.
I mean, have they ever even had an API?
Not. I mean,
have you ever tried to use the revenue cycle APIs for building an app?
Yeah, like APIs just aren't there. They're just like, man, no.
But let's just talk about Apple's success has always been around the fact that they don't have to build stuff for other people and have them screw it up.
Yeah.
So like their software, their operating systems were always built to run on their stuff or as something that they have approved. Yeah. So they're not like, oh, Windows puts out a version of their operating system, and Dell comes out with some underpowered, laptop that's running Intel Xeon, blah blah blah, right? And the next thing you know, that somebody's having a bad user experience on Windows, right? Apple's always been like, no, this is our stack, our operating system that we built that you're going to have an experience on our device.
Well, except for John Scully, when he was the CEO and he came in, he's like, yeah, we're gonna let people white label them, and so you had a handful of manufacturers out there that were building Mac clones.
Really?
Oh yeah, this would have been in the 90s, so probably like 96, 97.
Not Jobs. Not when Jobs.
Well, so as soon as Jobs came in, he's like, fuck that, and he killed it. He killed the entire deal. But there were, and I want to say it's PowerPC, but that's not it. That was what the old chipset was. But Power Computing might have been the company, but there was like 2 or 3 different companies that could make basically Apple clones, and you could then buy them and whatnot. But again, it was the same exact problem. Those guys cheap out on certain things. The experience is bad, and that just tarnishes the overall brand. So as soon as Jobs came in, killed the whole thing of the clones.
I do have a bone to pick with the M1 and M2s. Sometimes it just doesn't work right because it's a different architecture and
right.
Like that's
I was surprised that they did that, but obviously it was for a reason. And
yeah.
Well, and so you got to give them props that they're willing to commit, right? They're willing to be like, all right, we're going all in on this, and everybody's sorry about
almost
you.
like I was just talking about this with an engineer this morning that I was meeting with. He was on the product side, on like the actual physical mechanical engineering, and we were talking about NASA in the '60s, and they, you know, it was like a large percentage of the budget for the United States government was just given to the Apollo space program. And so they just literally dumped all this money every single year, and everyone knew that to go to the moon. And you look at it and you're like, that's kind of how Apple is. Like Apple dedicates so much investment into what they output that it's almost like it's like the brand that people just straight rely on. Right. And they have to produce.
Yeah.
Right. It's like they have $1 trillion and they put the ridiculous amount of it into R&D.
Yeah.
And so they're so well positioned to sit back, wait, watch people build watches, watch people build tablets, watch people build AI, and then eventually come into the game. And that's where you kind of get into everybody's sitting there waiting, right? And now we get this paper that comes out that they released with their Kevin, I can't even pronounce these guys' names. Kevin Gu, Kenton Lee, Zora Tung, blah, blah, blah. Like 5 engineers come out with this paper that Apple released, and it's about retrieval augmented language model pre-training.
Right.
And if you read the paper, it's actually written not like an engineer would write a paper. I think they're running these things through ChatGPT and been like, make it so somebody can actually understand
this. In today's trialing industry, blah, blah, blah.
And of course, you can kind of see an angle where, you know, Apple likes to get patents for things so that they can only do them. You can see that they're basically saying that everything that everybody's built so far is going to be completely useless once we come out with our thing. And the difference between what they are building is this inputless, self-aware AI model that's doing what you're talking about. It's going to basically be on your screen, it's going to ship with your computer. It's going to be on your screen. It's going to be seeing what you're doing. It's going to be hearing what's going on in the background as well, and it's going to be able to read and react.
Right. That's incredible. I mean, that actually going back to last week, because we were talking about like wearables. Maybe it was 2 weeks ago, and I was like, you know, it seems like the dream would be if it could just track you automatically, and you wouldn't have to. That's exactly what.
That's what this is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that the big key here is the context. Like one of the examples I saw online was like, hey, you do a Google search and you see that there's a pizza shop, and you're like, well, okay, now I have to like scroll and find the one that's the best rating, that's the closest to me, and click the call button or see what their opening hours are. Or you could just say like, hey, from the results, find the one that's closest to me that has the best ratings that's open tonight at 7 o'clock and give them a call real quick. And then it can like do that for you because it has context of the screen. I mean, maybe that's a bad example, but it's still interesting.
It's a technology.
Yeah.
Right. That's the difference between what Apple does and what other people don't. Is like ChatGPT implemented an interface to interact with their model that is the best one, but Apple's thinking about it as we're building a new technology here. Every time they always try to act like they did that, but the applications of these things they're not even professing to say yet. Right. I think that the one they put in the paper that is like the example is like you're looking at a document and it's going to know how to summarize the document.
Right. And it's supposed to all be some of the tech that we don't know. It's too early to tell yet, but it's supposed to be on device.
Yes, it's on device
and
technology.
Are they going to have? I missed. Is there going to be a dedicated chip that's just a AI chip? Or is your battery just going to be completely drained?
I think it will be targeted on the neural engine part of their SoC.
Okay.
Right, system on chip, that they all have that neural engine.
And now you're talking about a decentralized computing infrastructure for AI, which is probably needed.
Yeah.
Right? So that it's not just all going to one place, you know.
But have you guys been hearing that they've been talking to Google about potentially incorporating? Yeah, which is kind of an interesting...
I'm wondering if they're going to have a general applicability of this technology and then figure out where their APIs need to connect.
So if you go back to before the iPhone, right? They did a partnership with Singular. And so Singular. Remember Singular?
Yeah.
Right? So Steve Jobs brings out the CEO of Singular, and we're going to be partnering to build the Singular phone. It's going to have access to the iTunes and have access to your music and all this stuff. the whole thing was awful. Like the entire experience was absolute dog shit. And then the next year, they basically kill the whole deal and they release all their own phone, right? So that's it feels like we're kind of repeating this story where it's like, hey, Google, we need you for some things that we're not going to basically be building our own LLM to be able to handle.
But isn't Google still the search engine for Safari by default?
That's a good question.
They pay a lot of money for Google to be able to be on the Apple phone.
Right.
Yeah, so that may be a part of it.
They've always the article that I read was like literally like the second sentence was Apple and Google's long-standing partnership.
Yeah.
I think that they're they're kind of buddies.
They pay Apple
buddies.
a shit ton of money though. It's like
Yeah,
that's the thing.
they want to be.
Yeah.
They want to be the search engine of the iPhone, right? Because then you're just getting all that traffic. Now that being said, though, I kind of feel like
It's Google.
it's Google. I know, but for whatever reason, I thought I remember hearing that Apple's looking to buy another search engine. And
I hope it's Ask Jeeves.
Oh, good Lord. Did you ever? Okay, so you used to be able to go and say, "Is Jeeves gay?" And it would be like, "I prefer jovial." That was the way it answered. That was like one of the best Easter eggs that I had ever seen because a lot of people apparently were asking it if Jeeves was gay, and so now he would reply that I prefer jovial. I'm like, that's awesome.
Now, are there any kind of like privacy concerns that we should be thinking about when it comes to?
Well, that's what I like. So with Apple's whole concept of like doing a lot of things on device, having a lot of end-to-end encryption, that's kind of their shtick, right? Like where Google, everything has to be readable so they can give you the ads. Google's kind of like the antithesis of that, saying, you know what, we don't want to have anything to you. So if these large language models and R.E.A.L.M, which is what they're I've seen a couple different names, but R.E.A.L.M is kind of the name that everybody's referring to. If that's truly just running on device, then that just gives you that. I mean, that's no different than Llama or the ones that we're running just on our computers to be able to have like inference happening, just locally. Now, no question in my mind, though, when they start releasing these features, that it's only going to be available for the iPhone 16 and the next iPhone 17, and all that.
They're going
to use this. They're absolutely going to use this as means of basically saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, your 15's not strong enough to be able to handle large language models, so you don't have that access to that feature." That they'll use the AI features as a means to basically sell more hardware.
I think the general applicability of this AI is something that has never been done before. If I'm a multi-Apple device user, if I have a watch, if I have this, I have my iPad, and pretty much every digital interaction that I have is occurring on this device.
Yeah.
And if it's screen aware, it's going to basically have a database of everything that I'm doing, and it's going to be able to read and react to that.
Yeah.
So if it might be able to figure out if I'm in a bad mood, if I'm not even working today. It might be able to be like,
"Hey, Brandon, are you in a funk because you haven't moved? You've been on TikTok for the last 12 hours."
Right, like hey, you might want to, how it's like, hey, you can still do it, bud. Don't close those rings. It's going to be like, stop drinking, you idiot.
Oh man,
that's your first.
Now that's introduced this whole concept. I mean, how many companies is Apple going to kill with that? I mean, how many apps of it, all these applications that now the core iPhone can do?
Yeah, that's their thing. Right? They go and they release an app store. They find a couple. They sit back and they look like this app is blowing up. Everybody's using it. They're like, that would be pretty good to have as a feature within iOS. And then they just go and they send their developers making 500G a year, and they go and they build a better version of it. And the app developers are just like, well, what the fuck? Like, what happened? Yeah, so they'll do it again, and they'll just kill all those apps that were just specialized.
So it's safe to say that we actually don't. No one actually really knows what Apple's doing with AI. We just know Apple's doing it.
Right.
They have
we have a lot of pretty much everything that we're going to be talking about today is all just rumor, right?
Yeah.
Or news that we're hearing about. It's because there's R.E.A.L.M, there's their image model that they did, which was like for interacting with and editing like images on the fly. So I think we'll see that be incorporated within iPhoto. It wouldn't surprise me in the least if Apple is going to be treating AI at a much more use case focus versus OpenAI, which wants to try to kind of come up with like a generalized model that can do all of the things. That we're going to see HealthKit is going to have AI incorporated into it. No reason why you wouldn't, right? Like all that data is there. I should be able to be like, hey, what things do I do that increase my resting heart rate, right? And it should have access to that. Same with the wallet. Right? There's no question that we're going to have a finance AI that will be based on the wallet data that we have, and that Apple probably will make it so you can start incorporating all of your other accounts and just basically to be able to get to, here's my entire, because finance is one that you and I have been talking about a lot, about doing an AI and finance podcast. That could be really interesting. But yeah, I think Apple could just absolutely clean clock there.
Well, that's the other thing they talked about in that paper. Is they say that the underlying model of this that they're using or that they built is faster than ChatGPT 4.
Yeah, and more accurate.
And more accurate, and it's multimodal,
and it's on device,
and it's on device. So
which is crazy.
They're making some pretty insane claims in this paper. They're saying it's better, it's faster.
Right. And I mean, if you think about like when ChatGPT is running on, the hardware that ChatGPT runs on would just blow your mind, right? Like the cost of it's ridiculous. So to say that they're getting even anything remotely close to a ChatGPT 4 or a GPT-4 experience on device only is insane.
Well, and just compare this to the Apple Vision Pro. So we can all agree probably that the strap-on headset VR market wasn't necessarily like this life-changing thing.
Right.
Like were you guys out there like the next ones to buy the...
Did any of you guys have one before? A VR
I did
headset?
buy a Meta.
You did?
Yeah, I had one.
You had one?
I played some games on it
And
for a couple of
Beat
weeks.
Saber.
No, it was the game. It was like a shooting game. It was awesome.
Oh, nice.
Only played the game for about 3 or 4 weeks, and now it collected dust. I think I actually, true story, it was in my trunk for so long, and I was driving through the Mike's car wash, and I was just like, it's been in my car. I've been wanting to take it out. I looked over to the Mike's car wash guy. I said, dude, do you want a MetaQuest?
No, you didn't.
He said, I'd love one. I said, I'm opening my trunk. Grab it.
No
I
way.
swear to you, I gave it to him. So that's what happened to my MetaQuest.
But like so when you look at Apple last year, it was mostly about this new product launch that they were going to do from their stocks perspective. So if you're looking at this from an investment state, I would say this is beyond that times 100.
Yeah, because
maybe 1,000.
Yeah, because it's going to be incorporated in everything. So it'll be in the Quest or in the headset.
We're not talking about the touch bar here.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
We're talking about a completely transformational piece of technology that's going to take a already mainstream technology in terms of LLMs and bringing it to a new generation of devices. I'm buying Apple.
Is
after
this
this.
like? Isn't this like the Rabbit? What was that one?
A Rabbit R1.
Isn't this Rabbit R1 but on your phone? Because we talked about how great that was. That it's like trying to connect all these apps together.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's still fundamentally like it's not your phone.
Well,
And that was a
thing.
guy with a few 100,000 to a few million.
Exactly,
Budget. Yeah,
to
compared
build.
to about $1 trillion.
I haven't talked to anybody who's got one
Oh,
the actual rabbits yet, but it's the same thing, right? Like what would stop Apple from saying, all right, we're going to train an LLM on the UI of the apps that exist within our ecosystem.
I think we talked
the
about
right to
this
do that.
early on too, as like this is probably where this is going, but it's just funny that like it does always amaze me. Like Google you're talking about Apple's position. I think Google is also positioned to do a lot of these things, but it does always surprise me how Apple gets to these things, and it's like, all right, what's going on over at Google?
I agree. I think it's just the difference in the companies. So I had 2 points. I'll say this point in a second. The first point was, or question to you guys, was Google and Apple are both in the race. There is this concept that's brewing around legislation regarding AI. I would have to imagine that both of those companies are going, once they get big, put their foot in the race or whatever, that they're going to be basically dictating what that legislation has to say about AI. Question there, like, if there's anything there at all, like, do you think they're going to say, hey, it needs to be, like, because Apple's so big on privacy, do you think that
It's not going to happen this year because it's an election year. They just want to talk about wedge issues.
The border.
The last thing Trump or Biden want to do is look like they're stopping capitalism.
right?
But I will say, when it comes to Apple and Google, I think the fundamental difference between Apple and Google is Apple looks to things from a hardware first perspective, and Google looks at things from a software. First perspective. Google got into the phone game because they had to, not because they knew anything about making phones. Right. Apple's got this, like, they're so much more like primed to build the first mainstream device that ships with AI on it. Whether that's a good thing, whether that'll work, I don't know. But there's also a partnership there where Apple doesn't necessarily lead with, right? Like they might need that API or that software. So I think it's just the rich getting richer. I mean, who cares? I mean, they're all getting $900,000 a year.
Again, we talked about this a lot early on, which was like the people who are best positioned. OpenAI, great, they're first mover and all that, but like there's 3 big companies that have a lot of users already. They're gonna win. I think it's a foregone conclusion. It's just in what capacity, how are they gonna cut up that pie, and what's that end story gonna be? But
I mean, from the way that I think about, Sam Altman, who came through Y Combinator, right? Did he run Y Combinator?
Went through Y Combinator, ran Y Combinator.
What's the end game in the Y Combinator business?
Continue to own Stripe.
Okay, you're right.
Until they go public.
My answer was going to be acquisition, right?
No, they haven't gone public.
Like Sam Altman's the type of guy that to me seems like he would exit that business.
Yes.
Right. And maybe that, it's just going to happen pretty quickly. I think when it all comes down to it.
Right.
Like it's like that the race is going to come down to just a few horses, and is it going to be an AT&T Verizon thing, or is it just going to be?
It could be an Apple Samsung game. So Samsung's doing some really interesting stuff. They're already adding a lot of AI into their products.
What are we on the Samsung Galaxy 34?
I know. Does anybody have a Galaxy? Mm-mm. So I've got I've got a Galaxy 20 that I use just for testing.
I've got like a 10 that I use for old school Android testing.
I've got one somewhere around here.
Right. So again, I've been an Apple person since I was like a wee lad. Like I was 8 years old, and I'm like, this is amazing. Like I don't have to do DOS. This is fucking great.
I love DOS.
Eat a dick.
I used to change around my RAM so I could play like Carmen Sandiego.
Oh, dude, what a great! So again,
DOS baby,
tons of DOS games. Like you guys just won't appreciate it. That to launching an app where you had to be like, I forget even what the command was. Auto-exec whatever dot. And it was great. And the Carmen Sandiego, Indiana Jones had a bunch of
that game was good. The Fate of Atlantis.
Oh yeah.
Did you guys have Dick Tracy at all?
Oh hell yeah.
I didn't have that one. I remember you talking about that.
You could grill them.
Right. Yeah. But where in the world in Carmen Sandiego? If you haven't played, same with Oregon Trail was another.
But here's a gem. If you really want to get Carmen Sandiego, Where in Space is Carmen Sandiego is one of the greatest games ever. You learn so much about space.
That's cool. Yeah. So here's another one.
Learning. No.
So the story was that my dad owned a print shop in 1985, late 84, 85, ended up buying one of the first Macs for the preprint department. And so he dropped me off, or I went with him one weekend, and he's like, check out this Mac. I get in it, I find Mac Paint. And I'm just like, I'm 8 years old, and I'm just like, this is the most amazing. My mind is blown. I'm making flyers. I'm coming up with all sorts of shit. I'm printing things out. And it was absolutely the most transformational thing as a young lad. So he would drop me off on the weekends, and I would go and I would just play on these computers and do a bunch of stuff. But in the back of some magazine, I found someone selling software for Mac and PCs, and it was like, I forget the name of it, but it was some horror game. And I'm like, all right. And I managed to get $20, put it in an envelope, mail it out. End up like, a year later or whatever it was, I get some disc back. I put it in, and it's a role-playing game, but you can like, it was the most horrific. Like no 8-year-old should have had their hands on this.
Now you know why you're such a fuck up.
My wife would be like, yeah, that tracks.
Also, what? So you just mailed someone cash?
Oh, yeah, that was the way it was. Well, like back at Boys Life magazine, if you wanted that throwing star, you had to send out like literally a cat. You just had to send money in the mail, and it was always a 50-50 shot if they were just going to screw you or not. And every once in a while I did. I ended up getting some throwing stars in the back of Boy Scout or Boys Life magazine. took it to like 5th grade, this last year of 5th grade, got caught by the principal with my throwing stars. He's like, I'm taking these. Like, if you want them back, you can have your parents come get them. I'm like, well, I'm never seeing those things again. Sorry. Sidetrack to Brandon's youth.
We were talking about
DOS.
Before that, couldn't tell you.
R.E.A.L M. So
I guess I have a different question.
Yeah.
If I could take us on a sidetrack here. 23 episodes in, talking about all things AI, right? Health and AI, data, privacy. I mean, you name it. We've probably talked about some essence of it. At the beginning, we talked about the fundamentals of AI, and we've been doing this for I don't know, almost four months. And what in your guys' opinions is happening in the AI space, and what practically should people be looking at to just learn, just get everybody up to speed on what your perspective is on AI?
over the last 4 years, how has it changed? I guess would probably be the question, right?
Yeah.
Like, how is this evolving? Do you see an end game in this?
First of all, I would say all the startups that are AI focused, that money's drying up, and there's more like expectation of like, okay, there was a lot of hope and a lot of just dreams out there, 6 months ago, a year ago. Now it's like, all right, how are you going to make money?
Right.
And it's becoming more clearer than ever to me that the big players are the ones that are going to produce the LLMs. I know there are a few open source ones that are doing pretty well, and there's some profit and markets there, but it's the big players that are going to win the like kind of big game, long game there. The smaller people have to figure out how they're going to participate in that ecosystem and not generate their own thing. It's just, I don't think it's realistic, right?
I think the thing I'm seeing that I've learned is the model is going to become eventually a commodity.
Yes.
And it's the implementation and access to that model that will be what you buy.
Right. Because again, if I can chat with Apple's R.E.A.L M or whatever it is, do I ever really need to go to ChatGPT? Right? Like if it's just available right on my device, on all my devices, on my computer, on my Mac, on my or on my laptop, on my iPad, do I need to interact with some of those others? Same with like the original BigCheese app that we built, right? There's no question that these things are just going to continue to get more focused, and you're going to have these people that are just going to be available to you. Do you need co-pilots? Do you need that when it's all just built directly into the operating system? And yeah, so I think the big tech players always just end up winning in the long run. Of course, there's going to be your stripes or your unicorns that come out that are just taking a different approach. That the moons and the stars line up, they end up raising $80 million and just build something amazing. But a lot of times, yeah, I think it's just going to be these big companies who have the most money that they can build these models and train these models, and they're going to be great. That no startup's going to be able to compete.
Now, having said that, I want to actually contradict myself a little bit because I think there's like the large language model game where there's only the big players will survive. And then what about this? We haven't really talked a lot about the small language model or something that's way hyper focused on trained data, essentially just training your own model for a specific use case. And I think that's probably the next chapter that we're going to start to see. Everyone's familiarized.
But I don't think though that it will be as much of a global topic.
I agree,
because it's very much so like what prompt privacy is doing, right? So prompt privacy's Publius model is very specifically trained on being able to interact with enterprise data. Right, so it's like you can't go and ask it, tell me about how to build a nuclear bomb because it's just not trained on that. But if you can say, here's a document that I have, tell me what type of document it is, what's relevant about this kind of contract, what are all the attributes, and blah, 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 blah. Yeah. So they've built their own foundational model that's very specific. So I think that's where it goes.
To jump in, go ahead, Jacob.
No, I was just going to say, I think what we'll see from that is an extreme productivity jump at the corporate level. Think about like, if you have to ask legal for a document. No, you ask Sally for a document. Sally doesn't know if legally she's allowed to give you that document, so she has to go to legal. There's a 4 or 5 day wait period there. Well,
now
if you have it all,
literally right there.
It's going to be a lot of work to get there.
Yeah.
But if you have it all these systems intertwined, it's 10 seconds you can have that document, not 10 days or 4 days or whatever.
Yeah, I think from my side of things, I agree with all the points, of course. Start from the top. Yes, I think that AI was VCs tech industry had just plummeted from 2022 or 2021. 2022 started to go down. 2023 was a wash. 2024 is not looking any better. And AI was like the saving grace to pull, interest rates back where they need to be. And VCs can go back and raise money from LPs. So that happened. And then so a bunch of money gets invested in AI companies. I think that, to your guys' point, yes. So the reason that people are going to talk about a prompt privacy is the same reason people don't talk about a jobber, right? Because it's it's very beneficial, but it's not a big deal. That's not something we're just going to bring up unless we talk about like something that Big Cheese pulled on Weekly.
Right.
So yeah, I agree with that. Like if we hone in the models, and this goes back to whenever we talked with Aubrey, hone in the models specifically to one organization, that's probably the next version of the SaaS company in terms of like really leveraging AI and it growing and generating good revenue. It seems to me though that there might be the winner of that next chapter, if that chapter is the case, is the vendor of the databases of the data. The person selling the data to all the companies that need to train a model for their specific niche. The person selling that what are they selling? They're selling the easy access because they exist.
It's the endpoints. The endpoints, they're important, and that's it's like a Trojan horse for your next thing. But that's why the Grammarly thing. I keep going back to that. Grammarly's been advertising like unbelievable bonanza on the NCAA tournament. And why? It's because they now have an AI offering on their product, and somebody just gave them a bunch of cash, and they're like, yeah, we already have like a billion jillion users, and I've got Chrome extensions installed on them. Let's get them to pay more money.
Yeah,
let's go big.
For me, so those types of companies, the Grammarlys, the ones that kind of came out pre-AI, that offer solutions that are still AI driven. If I was their executives, I would be shitting my pants. Right, because everybody's gunning for them now. Because like before, building a Grammarly was hard.
Yeah.
Right now, building a Grammarly competitor is as much as literally taking a single string and passing it to an LLM.
I think there's two contexts we talk about this. We talk about this as who's the overall winner and who's going to get a piece of the pie.
Right.
All right. So I got a question.
Go for it.
I got a question. Because now I have an idea. So. Going back to my little theory, and I'll wrap it up. But my brain's now just going on a tangent here. So, could you create a company? I need to know if this is even feasible from training a model's perspective. Mm-hmm. So, if you created a company that the job of that company is we went out and we partnered with businesses, and through some sort of partnership and engagement, or say, hey, look, we'll be the vendor of your data for potential companies that want to train their models on your data. Right, it's all private, privatized, whatever. But whenever we sell that, you get a cut of it, right? And so, could there be a business that goes out, partners with all these large organizations, and becomes the vendor of making those businesses' data accessible? Because the likelihood that business is going to be like, from a bureaucracy's perspective, like a Lilly, is going to be like, oh yeah, we're going to create a marketplace. We're creating a marketplace for the data.
Well, you go back to Aubrey's initial conversation, which is it is really hard to go in there as a vendor and unlock these large organizations' data sets. Yeah, that's why I liked your idea about just like literally the database company, like the company that's literally they're outsourcing their SQL server to. Yeah, you know what I mean? Yeah, is latching on that technology, and so.
So that was it. I was just wondering if that even makes sense to be possible.
No, I think it does. And so what's funny is, and I've talked about it a little bit with prompt privacy, is the cognitive storage engine that they've been building, which is a hardware play that basically can go in. You add your Google service accounts, you add all of your different service accounts, and it can go and impersonate each individual that works at the company, starts ingesting all of the data. I finally got access to the API this week to start doing, and I'm able to literally search my Gmail, like all my emails that exist, anything that's on Google Drive, anything that exists.
So bad.
It's mind blowing.
Here, I think there's a couple opportunities. One, there's probably bigger companies. The big corporations are going to do it internally because it's either too sensitive, too many legal issues. They will just hire it. Eventually, there might be a prompt privacy that gets big enough that they're like, okay, these guys are sick. They're in the marketplace. We trust them or whatever. Prompt privacy is going to be after like the big organizations that don't want to do it internally.
Right.
But I think there's also a mid-market play where like there's the companies that need the people who actually implement the service. Like I think about all the HubSpot, all the Salesforce service providers, right? Well, why is there a HubSpot service provider?
I
right?
think I totally agree with you, and I think that one thing that we do is we look at things like at such like a discrete level because we get this understanding, and we're like, oh gosh, well that's the way to do it. Like Apple, that's the way I'm going to interact with AI. But like, there's other problems out there that aren't just your problems. There are tons of opportunities out here.
Well, to your point is like we are a company of 14 people, and it would be great if we had better docs. We have all sorts of problems. We got processes. We got how the way the data is put in there. There's an opportunity there for like the 100 to 300 employee companies. Someone to come in and be like, you were talking about standards and processes. Like this is how your data is going to be input. Stuff like that is going to start to bubble up, and these are just new companies that will exist. And
it's a combination of like existing standards and existing processes and the new technology, and you kind of bring those together. I think that like a lot of these enterprises are ultimately going to benefit by just saying, okay, we're just going to align with a specific spec. That's going to be our standard, and now anything that we do from an AI, it needs to just make sure we're following those specs. But
which also has really positive downstream effects. If all your data is now, because you got to do a lot of work. The reason that you don't do it is because it's hard and the juice isn't worth the squeeze.
Right.
But if it does all of a sudden start to make more sense to organize and categorize and do things a certain way, well, the downstream positive effects are that you can now interact or interface with way more softwares or whatever you need to do. So
hey, so I got two things. So we talked about Apple. Their big lagging problem is their lack of a existing referenceable, stable model.
Yeah.
Right, they're talking about this model that they did that's the best, right? But you can switch any model in and out of there.
So R.E.A.L M, we're talking about R.E.A.L M.
Yeah.
And what does it stand for again?
It stands for retrieval augmented language model pre-training.
Okay.
Which is I think most of the time they spend talking about in this paper is the fact that existing models have limited modalities, if you will.
Yeah.
Like they're sure they can do text to this thing, but what about just watching their screen the whole time they're using their computer? Right. But there was a couple different things that came out of my research that I thought was interesting. We talked about the partnership with Google, but there's two companies that are rumored to potentially be a huge part of Apple's future. One is Perplexity. So I wanted to get your take on Perplexity.
Oh yeah.
Because there's a specific thing I like about Perplexity. Don't let me forget to say what that is. Go ahead.
So what was funny is that it was on April 1st that I saw it that Apple was buying Perplexity. And I'm like, that makes all the sense to me in the world. And then I delved deeper, and it was like, April Fools. I'm like, you
But
fuckers.
It does. Why does it make sense for Apple to buy Perplexity? Because
they're there, right? They've already got it. They've got a lot of it figured out. Why? And Apple's sitting on $1 trillion on the bank. Just go buy these companies and just consume them.
Mm-hmm. But Perplexity has the same problem. Maybe not as deep, but like the way they source their data, it's not good for the content producers, right?
But they do source it, so that's the thing, right? So that's
because they source it by stealing.
I know, but so the difference between a Perplexity and a Find and ChatGPT is that when you search on their system, it'll tell you where they got the info from, and you can link back to it technically, which I've always appreciated.
Yeah, and I think their CEO was on Hard Fork a couple of weeks ago, but I think that they're looking at different ways to monetize that and to actually pay the people that they're showing the information to. For example, like it would make sense for the New York Times if I have a question in Perplexity, it shows me in New York.
So for the people that are listening all the way to the end of this, what's Perplexity?
It's a new search engine, right? It's basically an AI powered search engine that you type in your query and it goes and finds the results, searches for the results on the internet. It's not searching an LLM; it's searching for the results and then consuming that, putting it in a RAG, or
pulling the results back as a RAG response.
Right. So it's actually doing what I think we want AI to be doing.
Right.
It's like, hey, go do the search and then research all the top 10 results and tell me.
I like that kind of stuff.
I do too. I do too a lot. I think what was interesting model was like, okay, if it's showing a bunch of New York Times, if a user goes there and sees like 10 New York Times results over time, it's like, hey, this person's high intent. He probably likes the New York Times. Well, inside of the app, they could offer something that's like subscribe to the New York Times right now because you keep reading and getting results that are relevant or sourced by them. But of course, that doesn't exist today, and it would only exist for like the major players, similar to how like Google, you can buy things directly from Google, like products. But what did you have to do? You had to put that source code or that code in your website, and you had to tie a bunch of things together to make that work. But they're just not big enough, and there's not enough players, I guess. But anyway,
if you just go to our app, then the whole web makes sense and system. The other company that that is rumored, which I think is maybe a little bit maybe more far-fetched, is Anthropic. And talk to me about Anthropic is a model producing company.
Are they a bunch of OpenAI guys that went off and did their own thing because they were concerned about the usage?
I think I do. I think a lot of them came from OpenAI. I mean, as far as like model production goes, the people over at Anthropic are producing some of the best, right? Like 3 Opus is really, really impressive. I mean, again, we all compare everything to like ChatGPT 4, and even Sam Altman on Lex Friedman's podcast was like, it sucks. He's like, ChatGPT 4 sucks. And he's like, and I'm really hopeful that the next one that we release is going to be as dramatic as like going from 3.5 to 4. Right?
Considering that right now, I can go to ChatGPT 4 and have a very in-depth conversation about framework-specific code.
Yeah.
I'm not even talking about programming language-specific code, Dre. I'm talking about frameworks that exist within programming languages.
Really?
Right.
Oh yeah. I could, and you can cross the frameworks. You can go to ChatGPT 4 right now and say, I really kind of just want you to talk. Here's my stack. I'm building in Next.js and Tailwind, and I'm using the 13 plus. And I might be like, I might not know all that, but they do. Just tell them to search Bing.
Yeah,
like that's my hack.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, stop acting like you don't know this. Just go search Bing
it,
first,
asshole.
and then come back, which it can do. So the thing that Perplexity was kind of doing.
Yeah.
But anyways, the fact that Sam Altman says that it sucks is insane. So we do need to do an episode of ChatGPT 5 rumors because I know that they're trying to drop this bomb, and maybe that's the way that they can stay afloat is just by just crushing
every time, just a
crushing
new
these
release.
product launches.
It just comes out.
And
that's
maybe
what they do best.
Right.
I mean, if you're Altman, you've been through multiple exits, you've been through multiple wins. Maybe this is the one you stick with through the end.
Yeah, but there's no doubt that eventually somebody just buys it. Right,
That's what I think.
Or they end up just getting too big that nobody can really afford to buy it. But again, a Microsoft seems like the most logical acquirer of OpenAI. I mean, they've already put $10 billion into it. Where then you could see Amazon, who just put like $1 or $2 billion into Anthropic, just says, "All right, screw it, we're just buying them."
Two more things that I got because I think this is good. Are we overplaying Apple? Because I mean, they're really good at building UI like that people love to use, and they're really good at building core operating system stuff. Is the application of this AI? Are they gonna build something that seems like it works really well, but just can't give you the weather on the right day? You know what I mean? Like are they gonna build another like Siri? Like, is it gonna be like it takes Siri freaking 10 seconds to respond now, or like are they gonna trip over themselves?
I think they absolutely are going to trip over themselves. But I think that Apple, because Apple's obsessive, so they have this obsessive attention to the unobvious, right? Which I think is a very important kind of key thing that most people don't think about, that there's just a lot of subtle things that they put a lot of focus on that are very important to us as humans as we're interacting with technology that other places just don't even think about. And that was Johnny Ives, was the obsessive attention to the unobvious is his whole MO. Now he's obviously gone doing his Love Design or whatever the hell that name of that company is. But I think what's going to happen is they're going to roll it out. They're going to stumble, and then they're just going to keep iterating and improving and making it better and better and better, and eventually win. Right? Apple Maps is the story. So if you remember when Apple Maps first came out, people were driving into lakes, like people were driving off of bridges, because like their maps, it was just wrong. I mean, it was wrong on like every friggin' level. And now when you go and you compare Apple Maps to even Google Maps, Apple Maps, in my humble opinion, is better, right?
Yeah,
like
because
it looks
every
better.
time you need to make a turn, your Apple Watch vibrates.
Exactly,
and
it
you
starts
look at your
vibrating.
and you go, what the hell just happened?
Versus Waze, which tells you literally like
my
2 feet.
My wife hates Waze so much.
I know.
And she's like, I'm literally gotten into almost multiple car accidents
Exactly,
because
because of
like
Waze.
the perspective on the turn.
Yeah.
Have you ever noticed that?
It's horrible. And Waze was like, I was a Waze guy. So I was a Waze guy before Google bought Waze. And I'm like, Waze is the absolute best navigation app because it's redirecting you based on intelligence. But this is what I mean by these companies who are launching these AIs. Again, Waze had a lot of intelligence. And that's really what we're talking about when we talk about AI, is just intelligence within software. And Waze really did a great job. Then Google buys them. And then slowly and surely, Apple just keeps iterating, just like the turtle in the hair.
Yeah.
Right? And they just keep iterating, improving. And now I can go and like drop things in like 3D. It's like I'm playing a fucking video game, and I can see like downtown. I can see the buildings.
Some of Google software applications are some of the most mature in the entire world and stand the test of time.
They do, but then they kind of rest on those laurels. Right? And they just be like, yep, it's working. We're good to go. We don't need any more improvement. LevelDB is a great example of that, right? So LevelDB is this like low-level JavaScript database that you can leverage. And so I find it, I'm like, this is amazing. And I look, the last time it was updated was like 7 years ago. Yeah. And I'm like, does anybody still use it?
I'm still waiting for Google.
Everybody still uses it.
I'm still waiting for Google Wave 2.0.
Right.
Hey, by the way, this is a good quote. So This is everyone's asking about what the hell does R.E.A.L.M stand for. Mm-hmm. This is what it means. This is in the abstract of Apple's paper that they just put out. They say, while LLMs have been shown to be extremely powerful for a variety of tasks, their use in reference resolution, particularly for non-conversational entities, remains underutilized.
Yeah.
They're basically saying their technology that they're going to build isn't around a conversation. It's around a context that it's going to be ever present and available for.
With the screen, and the screen being the context.
The screen is the context.
Yeah.
And guess what? It's got all of our screens.
Exactly.
Got all the screens.
Yeah.
Well, I'm still waiting on a response from the Fat API for the old nutrition platform with it all in. never got a response from their team. So I don't think they're updating
Is it
that.
off?
No clue. Anyways, guys, this is the Big Cheese AI Podcast. Thank you guys so much for making it to the end. See you next week.